College was supposed to be the best time of my life, but it turned into a living nightmare. It all started when my roommate, Phoebe, moved out unexpectedly. One day, I came back from classes to find her side of the room completely empty. No note, no goodbye, nothing. At first, I was relieved. Phoebe and I had never really gotten along, and I was looking forward to having the room to myself for a while. But then, strange things started happening. It began with small noises. The creak of a floorboard, the rustle of bed sheets, coming from Phoebe's empty side of the room. I tried to brush it off as the building settling or my imagination running wild. But as the days went by, the occurrences became more frequent and more unsettling. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to see a dark shadow standing in the corner, only for it to vanish when I turned on the lights. Sometimes, I'd catch a whiff of Phoebe's perfume lingering in the air, even though all her belongings were gone. The worst was when I'd be studying at my desk and feel a cold breath on the back of my neck, causing my hair to stand on end. I tried to rationalize it all, but deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. It felt like Phoebe had never really left, like some part of her was still there, watching me. That's when I decided to find out what really happened to her. I started by asking around campus, but no one seemed to know anything about Phoebe's sudden departure. Her friends were just as confused as I was, saying she had stopped responding to their messages weeks ago. The resident advisor was no help either, claiming that Phoebe had filed the proper paperwork for moving out. Frustrated and increasingly scared, I turned to social media. Phoebe's accounts hadn't been updated in over a month. That's when I stumbled upon a local news article that made my blood run cold. Phoebe had been reported missing by her parents 3 weeks before she supposedly moved out of our room. My mind reeled with questions. How could she have moved out if she was already missing? Who had cleared out her things? And most chillingly, if Phoebe wasn't in our room, what was? The paranormal activity in the room intensified after my discovery. Objects would move on their own, and I'd often wake up to find Phoebe's side of the room in disarray, as if someone had been frantically searching for something. One night, I woke up to find a message scrawled on the mirror in what looked like lipstick. "Help me." Terrified, I went to the campus police with what I knew. They seemed skeptical at first, but agreed to investigate. As they searched Phoebe's side of the room, I noticed one of the officers grow pale. He pulled me aside and showed me what they had found. A small, hidden compartment in Phoebe's desk, containing a journal. The last entry sent chills down my spine. The journal entry was dated the day before Phoebe supposedly moved out. It was frantic and barely legible, but I could make out enough to piece together a horrifying story. Phoebe had stumbled upon some kind of secret society on campus, one that dealt in dark rituals and ancient magic. She wrote about midnight meetings in the old bell tower, blood sacrifices, and a powerful artifact they were searching for. The final lines of the entry were the most chilling. "They know I know. They're coming for me. If you're reading this, I'm already gone. Don't trust anyone. They're everywhere." The police took the journal as evidence and promised to investigate further. But as days turned into weeks with no new leads, I began to feel like I was the only one who cared about finding out what really happened to Phoebe. The activity in our room continued to escalate. I'd wake up with scratches on my arms, or find Phoebe's name written over and over on the walls, only to disappear when I looked again. The shadows I saw grew more solid, more menacing. Sometimes I swore I could see Phoebe's face in them, her eyes wide with terror, her mouth open in a silent scream. I knew I couldn't stay in that room any longer. But as I packed my bags to leave, I realized with growing horror that it might already be too late. The same dark forces that had taken Phoebe might now be coming for me. I moved out of the dorm and into a small off-campus apartment, hoping to escape the terrifying experiences. But it soon became clear that whatever had attached itself to Phoebe had followed me. The strange occurrences continued, growing more intense with each passing day. I threw myself into researching the secret society Phoebe had mentioned in her journal. Late at night, I'd pore over old university records and local folklore, trying to find any connection. That's when I discovered the chilling truth. This wasn't just a campus organization, but an ancient cult with roots going back centuries. They called themselves the Order of the Eternal Shadow, and they believed in harnessing dark energies to achieve immortality. According to the legends, they needed regular sacrifices to maintain their power. Phoebe must have been their latest victim. As I dug deeper, I started noticing strange symbols appearing around my apartment. The same ones I'd seen in the old books about the cult. Black candles would appear lit in my room, even though I never bought any. And the shadows seemed to watch my every move, growing larger and more menacing. One night, I woke up gasping for air, feeling like something was sitting on my chest. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw a figure standing at the foot of my bed. It was Phoebe, but not as I remembered her. Her skin was pale and translucent, her eyes hollow and black. She opened her mouth to speak, and I heard her voice in my head. "They're coming for you next." Panicked, I packed a bag and fled my apartment, driving aimlessly through the night. I ended up in a small motel several towns over, hoping I had outrun whatever was haunting me. But as I settled into the dingy room, I realized with growing dread that I could never truly escape. The air grew cold, and I watched in horror as my breath began to fog in front of me. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to pulse and writhe, taking on familiar shapes. I could hear whispering, dozens of voices speaking in an ancient language I couldn't understand. Suddenly, my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. "Join us, and the haunting will end. Resist and suffer Phoebe's fate." As I stared at the screen, paralyzed with fear, a hand emerged from the shadows, reaching for me. I screamed and ran from the room, but the parking lot was filled with hooded figures, their eyes glowing in the darkness. I'm writing this now from a library computer, constantly looking over my shoulder. I don't know how much longer I can run, or if there's anywhere I can hide from this ancient evil. If you're reading this, please, be careful. The Order of the Eternal Shadow is real, and they're always looking for new victims. To Phoebe, if you're still out there somewhere, trapped between worlds, I'm sorry I couldn't save you. And to anyone who might be experiencing something similar, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't ignore the signs like I did, because once they set their sights on you, there's no escaping the shadows. I never thought I'd be grateful for the campus housing lottery, but when I landed a spot in the coveted Oakwood apartments, I was thrilled. The idea of having my own room in a shared two-bedroom unit seemed like a dream come true. Little did I know, it would soon become my worst nightmare. On move-in day, I met my roommate, Jake. He seemed nice enough, quiet but helpful. He even offered to carry some of my boxes up the stairs. As we settled in over the next few weeks, I found myself appreciating Jake's considerate nature. He always cleaned up after himself, never played loud music, and even shared his mom's homemade cookies with me. But about a month into the semester, things started to feel off. It began with a strange text from an unknown number, "I see you." I brushed it off as a wrong number or a prank, but the messages kept coming, each one more unsettling than the last. "That red sweater looks good on you. Why didn't you wave back at the cafe? You should really lock your window at night." I tried to convince myself it was nothing, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Everywhere I went, the library, the gym, even just walking to class, I felt eyes on me. I'd whip around, heart pounding, but never saw anyone suspicious. Just crowds of students going about their day, oblivious to my growing paranoia. As the days passed, my anxiety skyrocketed. I started double-checking locks, drawing curtains, and taking different routes to class. Sleep became elusive, replaced by long nights of staring at the ceiling, straining to hear any unusual sounds in our apartment. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table, jumpy and exhausted, Jake noticed my distress. "Hey, you okay?" he asked, genuine concern in his voice. "You seem really on edge lately." Maybe it was the lack of sleep, or the weight of carrying this secret fear, but I found myself spilling everything to Jake. The texts, the feeling of being watched, all of it. As I spoke, I noticed Jake leaning in, his eyes widening with what I thought was shock and sympathy. That's terrifying, he said, placing a comforting hand on my arm. Have you told anyone else about this? I shook my head. Just you. I didn't want to worry my parents, and I wasn't sure if campus security would take it seriously. Jake nodded, his brow furrowed in thought. Well, I'm glad you told me. We'll figure this out together, okay? Maybe we can set up some cameras or something. His support should have made me feel better, but something about his intense interest unsettled me. Still, I pushed the thought aside, grateful to no longer be alone in this. That night, I slept a little easier, comforted by the idea that someone was looking out for me. But as I drifted off, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered a warning I couldn't quite make out. The next few days passed in a blur of classes and sleepless nights. Jake, true to his word, helped me install a small security camera in our living room. He even walked me to and from campus, claiming he wanted to keep an eye out for anyone suspicious. But the threatening messages didn't stop. If anything, they became more frequent and detailed. I like how you take your coffee with 2 sugars. That new shampoo smells nice on you. Each one sent a chill down my spine, leaving me wondering how the stalker knew such intimate details. One afternoon, I returned to the apartment early, my last class canceled. As I approached our door, I heard muffled sounds coming from inside. Thinking Jake was watching TV, I entered quietly, not wanting to disturb him. The living room was empty, but I could hear movement coming from Jake's room. His door was slightly ajar, and as I passed by, something caught my eye. I froze, my blood turning to ice in my veins. There, on Jake's bed, lay an array of masks. Not Halloween masks or costume props, but lifelike, custom-made silicone masks. Each one different, yet all unsettlingly realistic. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Why would Jake have these? As I stood there, paralyzed with confusion and growing fear, I heard Jake's footsteps approaching from behind. You weren't supposed to see that, he said, his voice eerily calm. I whirled around, coming face to face with my roommate. The kind, helpful Jake I thought I knew was gone, replaced by someone with cold, calculating eyes. Jake, I stammered, my mouth dry with fear. What is all this? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You know, I really thought I'd have more time before you figured it out. I've been so careful. As he spoke, he moved towards his closet, never taking his eyes off me. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my feet seemed rooted to the spot. You see, Jake continued, opening the closet door, I've been watching you for a long time, long before you even knew I existed. The closet light flickered on, revealing a sight that made my blood run cold. The walls were covered in photos, hundreds of them, all of me. In class, at the gym, walking across campus. Some were even taken through my bedroom window. How? I managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. Jake's smile widened. Oh, it was easy. I made sure I'd be assigned as your roommate. I've been planning this for months. My mind raced, piecing together all the little moments that should have been red flags. The way he always seemed to know my schedule, how he volunteered to help with the security camera, his overly concerned reaction to my stalker story. The texts, I said, realization dawning. The feeling of being watched. It was you all along. Jake nodded, looking almost proud. I have to say, you made it more fun than I expected. The way you'd jump at shadows, always looking over your shoulder. It was exhilarating. As he spoke, he reached into the closet, pulling out something that made my heart stop. Another mask. But this one looked exactly like me. What are you going to do? I asked, my voice trembling as I eyed the exit. Jake followed my gaze and chuckled. Don't bother. I disabled the new security camera hours ago. No one's coming to help you. He took a step closer, the mask, my face, dangling from his hand. You know, I've worn many faces over the years, but I think yours might be my favorite. In that moment, survival instinct kicked in. I bolted for the door, but Jake was faster. He grabbed my arm, yanking me back with surprising strength. I screamed, hoping against hope that someone would hear. Shh, Jake whispered, pressing a cloth over my mouth and nose. It's okay. Soon, you won't have to be afraid anymore. As the world began to fade around me, my last conscious thought was of all the signs I'd missed, all the times I'd dismissed my instincts. How could I have been so blind? I don't know how long I was out, but when I came to, I was tied to a chair in a dimly lit room I didn't recognize. My head throbbed, and fear clawed at my throat as I remembered what had happened. Jake stood before me, but he wasn't Jake anymore. He wore the mask, my face, and when he spoke, it was with my voice. "Don't worry," he said, running a hand through hair styled just like mine. "I'll take good care of your life. No one will even know you're gone." As he turned to leave, I realized with horror that my nightmare was far from over. It was only just beginning. I've always been a light sleeper, but ever since Paul moved in, getting a full night's rest has become impossible. At first, I chalked it up to the usual adjustment period with a new roommate. But as weeks turned into months, I realized something wasn't right. Paul's nocturnal habits were far from normal. Every night, without fail, I'd hear his footsteps echoing through our small apartment. The creaking floorboards and his hushed whispers became an eerie lullaby that kept me tossing and turning. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he worked nights? But no, I'd see him leave for his day job every morning, looking haggard and worn. His eyes, once bright and friendly, now seemed hollow and haunted. One particularly restless night, I decided to confront him. As I stepped into the hallway, the air felt thick and oppressive. The dim light from the living room cast long shadows that seemed to writhe and twist unnaturally. That's when I noticed them, bizarre symbols etched into the walls. They looked like a cross between ancient runes and mathematical equations, scrawled in what appeared to be charcoal. My heart raced as I traced my fingers over the rough markings. What the hell was going on? I found Paul in the kitchen, hunched over the table, furiously scribbling in a worn notebook. When he saw me, he jumped, his eyes wild with fear and something else, desperation. "Paul," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "we need to talk." Paul's reaction was not what I expected. Instead of denying anything or making excuses, he broke down. Tears streamed down his gaunt face as he grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "You don't understand," he choked out. "I can't sleep. I mustn't sleep." I guided him to the couch, my concern overriding my fear. As we sat down, Paul's story poured out of him like a dam breaking. It had started 3 months ago, he explained, right before he moved in. He'd been having vivid nightmares, dreams so real he could taste and smell them. But these weren't ordinary bad dreams. In each one, he died in increasingly horrific ways. "At first, I thought it was just stress," Paul said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But then I noticed something off about the dreams. There was always this figure, watching from the shadows, and with each dream, it got closer." I listened, a chill creeping up my spine as Paul described the entity. It was tall and gaunt, with limbs too long for its body. Its face was a blur of shadows, except for its eyes, pitch black orbs that seemed to swallow all light. "The last time I slept," Paul continued, his whole body shaking now, it touched me. I felt its cold fingers on my chest, and when I woke up, Paul pulled up his shirt, revealing 5 angry red marks over his heart. They looked like burns, blistered and raw. "That's when I knew," he whispered. "It's real, and if I sleep again, it'll take me for good." I stared at the marks on Paul's chest, my mind reeling. Part of me wanted to dismiss his story as the ravings of a sleep-deprived mind, but the raw fear in his eyes and those undeniable marks made that impossible. "The symbols," I said, gesturing to the walls. "What are they for?" Paul's eyes darted around the room, as if checking for unseen observers. "Protection," he muttered. "I found them in an old book. They're supposed to keep it at bay, but I don't know how much longer they'll work." He showed me his notebook, filled with the same strange markings covering our walls. Mixed in were detailed drawings of the entity, each one more disturbing than the last. The most recent sketch showed the creature looming over Paul's sleeping form, its long fingers mere inches from his face. "I've tried everything," Paul continued, his voice cracking. "Sleeping pills, meditation, even a sensory deprivation tank. But nothing works. The moment I start to drift off, I feel it waiting for me." I asked about seeing a doctor or a sleep specialist, but Paul shook his head vehemently. "They can't help. This isn't medical. It's something else, something ancient and evil." As if to emphasize his point, the lights in the apartment flickered. A cold draft swept through the room, making both of us shiver. "It's getting stronger," Paul whispered, his eyes wide with terror. I think it's feeding off my fear, my exhaustion. The longer I stay awake, the more powerful it becomes." I realized then that Paul wasn't just sleep deprived, he was at his breaking point. And if what he was saying was true, we were both in grave danger. Over the next few days, I threw myself into researching Paul's condition. I scoured the internet for similar cases, consulted with paranormal experts, and even visited a local occult bookshop. Most of what I found was useless, but there was one recurring theme: the importance of facing your fears. Meanwhile, Paul's condition deteriorated rapidly. He barely ate, his speech became slurred, and he started experiencing microsleeps, brief, uncontrollable moments of unconsciousness. Each time he nodded off, he'd jerk awake screaming, claiming he could feel the entity's presence growing stronger. On the fifth night, things came to a head. I returned home to find our apartment in chaos. The protective symbols on the walls were smeared and distorted, as if something had tried to erase them. Furniture was overturned, and there was a putrid smell in the air, like rotting meat. I found Paul in his room, huddled in a corner. His eyes were bloodshot, darting wildly around the room. When he saw me, he let out a strangled sob. "It's here," he croaked. "I can't fight it anymore. I'm so tired." As he spoke, the temperature in the room plummeted. The shadows in the corners seemed to deepen and writhe. And then I saw it, a tall, impossibly thin silhouette emerging from the darkness behind Paul. My blood ran cold as two pitch-black eyes fixed on me. I knew then that this was no hallucination. The entity was real, and it had come to claim its prize. In that moment, I made a decision that would change both our lives forever. "Paul," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "you need to sleep." His eyes widened in terror. "No, you don't understand. It'll kill me." "Listen to me," I insisted, even as the entity loomed closer. "You've been running from your fear, and it's only made it stronger. You need to face it." As I spoke, I remembered something I'd read about lucid dreaming, the ability to control your dreams. It was a long shot, but it was all we had. "When you fall asleep," I continued, "remember that it's your mind, your rules. You have the power, not it." Paul shook his head, tears streaming down his face, but I could see the fight leaving him. He was simply too exhausted to resist any longer. As his eyes began to close, the entity made its move. It lunged forward, its elongated arms reaching for Paul. I interposed myself between them, feeling an icy chill as its fingers brushed my skin. "You can't have him," I growled, surprising myself with my bravery. For a moment, everything hung in balance. Then, Paul's breathing deepened as he fell into true sleep. The entity let out a silent howl of rage, its form beginning to dissolve like smoke in the wind. I stayed with Paul through the night, watching as the color returned to his face. When he finally awoke, 18 hours later, his eyes were clear for the first time in months. "It's over," he said simply. "I faced it in my dreams, just like you said, and I won." As sunlight streamed through the windows, we both knew that the nightmare was finally over. But the memory of those pitch-black eyes would haunt us both for years to come.